They had been told for decades that it was all exaggeration, that the stories were inflated, carefully staged, designed to intimidate rather than impress. In Soviet military academies, briefing rooms, and closed-door lectures, American military power was often described as something loud, theatrical, dependent on image rather than substance, a force that relied on spectacle to hide internal weakness. But the moment they crossed the threshold of that American military base, something became immediately clear to the Soviet officers standing there in silence. This was not theater. This was not propaganda. This was the real thing. What they were witnessing was not a demonstration prepared for visitors, but the everyday machinery of a nation that had mastered the art of turning innovation into power, quietly, efficiently, and without the need to prove anything to anyone. To understand why that realization mattered so deeply, it is necessary to understand how the Cold War was actually fought. It was not primarily a war of tanks colliding or aircraft dogfighting in the sky. It was a war of assumptions, a war of perception. Each side constructed an image of the other based on fragments of intelligence, intercepted communications, satellite photographs, and ideology. What could not be seen directly was often dismissed, distorted, or explained away. And for decades, the Soviet Union believed that American technological superiority was overstated, exaggerated for psychological effect rather than grounded in reality. The United States, however, was building something fundamentally different. It did not rely solely on numerical superiority, fear, or spectacle. It relied on systems, on integration, on an unshakable belief that technology, organization, and human judgment could operate together as a single, coherent force. While much of the world imagined war as chaos and noise, American military power was being refined in calm, climate-controlled rooms filled with humming computers, synchronized radar screens, and personnel who trusted their environment because it worked. That invisible advantage, built patiently over decades, was something the Soviet Union had attempted to measure from afar, never fully grasping its depth or its implications. The officers who entered that base were not naive observers, nor were they politically motivated visitors. They were seasoned professionals, engineers, radar specialists, logistics officers, men trained specifically to dismantle illusions and expose weaknesses. Their careers had been spent analyzing Western capabilities through intelligence reports, satellite imagery, and ideological filters. They were prepared to find exaggeration. They were prepared to find carefully staged demonstrations designed to impress foreign eyes while concealing deeper flaws. What they were not prepared for was how little effort the Americans made to impress them at all. There were no dramatic presentations waiting at the entrance, no rehearsed explanations, no carefully scripted moments highlighting selected strengths. The technology simply existed, operating as it always did, indifferent to who was watching. That indifference was perhaps the most powerful signal of all. It suggested confidence. It suggested maturity. It suggested a system that did not depend on appearances to validate itself. As they moved deeper into the base, what struck them first was not the hardware itself, but the atmosphere surrounding it. There was no visible tension, no urgency, no sense of impending crisis. Personnel moved with calm confidence, not because they were being closely supervised, but because this environment was familiar, Procedures were followed with precision, yet without rigidity. Decisions were supported by systems designed to reduce uncertainty rather than amplify it. For officers raised in a culture of strict hierarchy, constant oversight, and political pressure, this calm was deeply unsettling. In Soviet doctrine, control often meant pressure. Supervision meant authority watching authority. Errors were anticipated not by system design, but by layers of command. Here, control appeared to be embedded directly into the system itself. People trusted the process because the process was reliable. That difference was subtle but profound, and it could not be dismissed as propaganda or coincidence. Then came the control rooms. This was where any remaining doubt began to dissolve. Radar displays updated in real time, integrating data from multiple sources without delay. Information flowed seamlessly across systems that communicated continuously with one another. Computers were not isolated machines requiring constant manual interpretation. They were part of a connected network, built to support decision-making at every level, from operators to senior commanders. Human judgment was not replaced, but supported, reinforced, and clarified by technology. In the Soviet Union, much of this integration still existed only in theory. It appeared in research proposals, classified papers, or limited experimental environments. Hardware existed, but integration lagged behind. Systems often functioned independently, requiring manual coordination. Here, integration was not an aspiration. It was the baseline. It was routine, operational, reliable. What made the impression so powerful was not any single piece of hardware, but the realization that this level of coordination was normal. This was not a special installation constructed to impress foreign visitors. This was how American bases functioned every day, quietly, consistently, without ceremony. The systems didn't attempt to intimidate. They did not need to. Their mere existence communicated capability more effectively than any demonstration ever could. The realization did not arrive suddenly. It unfolded slowly, in silence. The officers exchanged brief glances, subtle nods, carefully restrained expressions. Questions were asked cautiously, answers absorbed even more carefully. No one spoke openly about what they were thinking, but the conclusion was unavoidable. This was not exaggeration. This was not deception. This was an ecosystem of technology, training, and institutional trust refined over decades. And with that realization came a far more unsettling question. If this was what they were allowed to see, if this represented only the visible surface of American capability, then what existed beyond the areas open to inspection? What systems operated behind closed doors, without visitors, without diplomatic agreements, without limitation? What level of redundancy, automation, and resilience existed outside the controlled tour? The balance they believed in suddenly felt less certain, less symmetrical, less predictable. The idea that both sides were roughly equal in capability, an assumption that underpinned much of Cold War stability, now appeared more fragile than they had been taught to believe. The visit ended without incident. There were no confrontations, no dramatic exchanges, no official acknowledgments of what had occurred. On paper, nothing had changed. Reports were written. Protocol was followed. The Cold War continued. But internally, something had shifted, not ideologically, but psychologically. For the first time, some officers confronted the possibility that the advantage they had assumed was balanced might not be balanced at all. That day, no weapons were fired, no orders were given, no battles were fought. Yet it was a moment of quiet revelation, a moment when belief gave way to observation, when assumptions collided with reality, and when a group of highly trained professionals realized that American power was not merely loud or visible but systemic, deeply embedded, and extraordinarily difficult to replicate. They entered that base expecting deception. They left with something far more unsettling: understanding. And in the silent struggle of the Cold War, that understanding was one of the most decisive weapons of all,